From the John DeVita Broadcast Center, welcome to Armchair Experts with Jim Leon and Rich Massaro on the Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network.
Well, Rich, I never thought we'd make the big time, but you know what? Here we are. We are at the John DeVita Broadcast Center doing our first podcast, and for something that's going to go out on the website and WRHS.
Well, you know what? The first thing that I'd like to do on the broadcast is thank John. And you know what, folks? John showed me pictures during the basketball season of this setup, but you have to see it to believe it. I hesitated to ask John how much he had invested in here because it's a lot.
It is. It is. This is Jim Leon along with Rich Massaro. We have decided we are going to call ourselves the Armchair Experts.
Armchair Experts.
We will just come on, and we are making our first attempt here at this, and we'll see what we do. We've been doing things on WRHS for basketball for the last couple of seasons, 2-3 seasons now, and we've carrying on conversations that Rich and I started probably in 1966.
Jim, I can remember sitting in the, I think it was called the English lab with you, and Mr. Molnar, I think, used to run the show up there, and we'd sit there and we'd look at the, I guess it might have been the Sun Times or the Daily News, and I'll never forget talking to you one time, and there was a column written by one of the paper's columnists, and that was our senior year was the year that the Cubs made the big run at the pennant and then dropped out at the last, and the Sox that year were pitiful. And I remember sitting there with you reading a column, and we were laughing because we thought it was great humor that the columnist said that watching the Sox play was like watching grass grow.
Yes.
So that's
about the way it is, and it's getting to the point this year, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit tonight. When we're going to talk about the locals. Watching the White Sox this year is sort of like watching grass grow, especially on the offensive side.
You know what? Actually, it's amazing to me when I look at them, because they really should be better than that. But I'm thinking, how does a player, and this is something that I hadn't even thought about until you just brought it up, how does a player that has been consistently, at least power-wise, like Adam Dunn has been over the course of his career, all of a sudden, 2 years ago, he's batting a buck and change. Last year, he seemed to rebound. But this year, he fell off the cliff again. How the heck does that happen? Is he just washed up, or what's the deal there?
I don't know. But when you start to look at this, let's just start talking about baseball, and we'll go back and we'll pick up hockey in a second. Looking at both sides of town right now, the Cubs are 25-38. I don't know if that included today or not, which takes them out to projecting out. They're playing at a pace that's going to be 64-98 for the season. The White Sox are 28-35, playing out to a pace that's going to get to 72-90. However, if we start to look at a bit of the analytics a little bit, and we look at Bill James' Pythagorean theorem relating runs scored, runs allowed, and look at the performance of the teams, projecting that out over the season, projecting where the Cubs are right now, the Cubs project out to be a 77-85 ball club.
Okay.
So obviously at this point in time, early on at this point, after 63 games, they project out to 30-33, which takes them out to 77-85 for the season. Okay. The White Sox, 28-35, projects out to 72-90. Take the Pythagorean theorem. Look at the runs scored, runs allowed. They're exactly where they should be.
Let me ask you this, Jim. Of course, runs allowed would also encompass defense. I was going to ask you where defense came in on that, but obviously comes in on the runs allowed.
Yeah.
I look at both teams, and I'm thinking, you had mentioned to me, we met real quick yesterday for lunch for 20, 25 minutes and talked a little bit, and I'm talking about the Sox now, you had mentioned that maybe the team was kept together a year too long. And when I say that, we're talking about guys like Konerko, Przynski, and we're talking about last year as opposed to this year. And maybe those guys were kept together 1 year too long. And I'm thinking that that's possibly part of the problem here. The other thing is, though, as I thought about this, what you had said yesterday, I'm thinking, wasn't there a good possibility, say, that the Sox would have lost Paul Konerko the year after, I guess it would have been the winter after the World Series. I thought the Angels had made a strong bid for him.
I believe they did that year.
And at this point, obviously, hindsight is 50-50, but the type of guy that Konerko is, I think not that he was on the downside, but he was already into his early 30s when I think Jerry Reinsdorf actually stepped in and made the decision to sign him. Let's put out the money, let's keep Paul. And I'm wondering now, the way things are, and not because he's having a down year or maybe this is going to be his last year, but maybe that would have been a time to let him go and start to develop or grab somebody else to replace him.
It should have been, because you know what I mean. You look at the Sox now, and their farm system is rather bereft of talent.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at the Sox as a team-wise right now, hitting 240 as a team, 14th in the league.
Okay.
293 on base percentage, 15th in the league.
Wow. 373
slugging, 14th in the league. OPS, on base percentage and slugging, 666, 15th in the league. Konerko, you just three lines that amaze me the way they are right now. Dunn, 182 average, 282 on base percentage, 449 slugging.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, with 17 home runs, he's going to have a bigger slugging percentage.
Sure.
Konerko, 231, 298 on base percentage, 349 slugging. Keppinger, who was supposed to be this steady person that was going to fill in at third base or whatever, 229, 234 on base percentage. That's pathetic.
That's really pathetic.
That's absolutely pathetic. You look at wins above replacement. The wins above replacement, well, Dunn cost them almost 0.6 of a game. If you compare him to an average player that would replace him, an average player is 0.6 of a game better, 0.6 of a victory better.
Okay. Just an average player.
Just an average player to replace him.
Okay.
So there's obviously some issues, and what's been disappointing this year is if you look at their pitching hasn't been too bad.
No, I think their pitching is pretty solid, and even with Floyd going down and Peavy having a little spell where he's been out, they've still somehow they've picked up the slack. I have to say, one of my pet peeves in baseball is every time a pitcher his name comes up, well, he throws 95 or he throws 96 or he throws this or that. I mean, you and I both know that the velocity doesn't make you a pitcher. And when I think about the Sox, I think of a guy, I saw him pitch. I think they brought him up last year or maybe the year before a little bit. I saw him pitch a game on a real dreary afternoon. I think he pitched against the Tigers and did well. Was Dylan Axelrod, a guy who, he doesn't have what they would consider overwhelming stuff, but he knows how to pitch. And I haven't watched the other young guy, the lefty, who am I thinking of, the Hispanic left-handed pitcher. I can't think of his name.
Santiago.
Not Santiago, but the other kid. I haven't seen him pitch, but I think he's done fairly well. And Santiago, of course, is in not a tough position, but they tend to.
Quintana, I'm sorry.
Quintana's the guy I'm thinking of.
Yeah, Santiago's only started about a half a dozen games this year.
But Santiago's a guy that, he started out, I think last year he was the closer to begin with.
Right.
And then, they use him in different spots in relief, and then when they needed a starter, they bumped him up into a starter's role. So he's, not that I buy into the idea of specialization. If you're pitching, you should be able to pitch regardless of where they put you. But he has been bumped around a little bit, and I think he's done, fairly well. So, yeah, their pitching has been good, to make a long story short.
We look on the other side of town.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the Cubs, 241 hitting as a team, which is 11th in the league.
Okay.
298 on base percentage. Now, some of that I would look at and attribute that, well, let's face it, most of the games they play, the pitchers are going to hit.
Yeah.
That could drive down your on-base percentage.
Sure.
403 slugging percentage, which happens to be 5th in the league.
Okay.
What's the big problem here right now? Well, you look at Castro, 238 batting average, 276 on-base percentage.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what you're going to do to stop that.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing I would have done, not that it would have stopped that, but before, maybe an hour or so before the broadcast, I'm thinking about some of the things we're going to talk about, because we had, you had mentioned the topics we might hit on, and I'm thinking to myself, Jim, the Cubs, okay, we're talking about the Cubs, but it could apply to any team. Why are you putting out, okay, and hear what I have to say, and I'll get back to the hitting part of it, but Edwin Jackson, who I like, when I saw him pitch for the Sox and the Cardinals, a really tough, hard-nosed pitcher, a guy who'll battle, a guy I like, but not a guy that if I was the GM or if I was running a ball club that I would commit $50-some million to over the course of, yeah, would I like him on my club? Yes, but would I like him for that money? I would say no.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say the same. Now, getting back to, you brought up Starlin Castro, there's no way, as I thought about this, that I would have plunked down the money they have for Castro and Rizzo at this point in their careers. No way. To me, would you like to keep those guys? Do they have potential? Yes. But you know what? I don't think that they've shown that they deserve long-term big bucks contracts, and this is one of the big problems with the Cubs. It has nothing to do with their hitting, but it has to do with their philosophy.
And it's always seemed to be their philosophy.
Right.
And maybe in this day and age, with how long you can keep a player under control,
mm-hmm.
maybe this is what they felt they can do, that they need to do. Do I think Rizzo's a bust? I think the jury's still out on Rizzo.
I'm not saying either one of them is necessarily a bust, but I don't think either one of them has earned a long-term contract. And I understand, I'm not glossing over what you just said about how long you can control a player, but to be totally honest with you, Jim, at this point in time, from what I've seen, do I like both of them? They're young guys. It's nice to watch them play. Sure. But if I was management, would I be afraid that if they walked, I couldn't replace them? No, I wouldn't.
No. And the philosophy that the Cubs have developed now with developing the farm system first and having those players in the farm system
mm-hmm.
that can replace players at the major league level when they move on, when they grow old, when they, get injured, is the right way to go. I think, and unfortunately, I think the White Sox are going to have to look at that approach sometime pretty soon, and they may have to reach the point where they're going to have to start selling off this year. Whether they have anybody that they can sell off, I don't know. Maybe Konerko would be good for somebody down the stretch.
Well,
a designated hitter, somebody that can help a ball club down the stretch run. Maybe, I don't know if Adam Dunn's going to be worth anything to anybody.
I sort of doubt that. I think they're basically stuck with Dunn, and I don't even know how long he signed for. Is it like 5 years? I mean, this is his third year.
There is at least one more year, maybe two, on that contract.
Right.
Somebody just posed another question today, just talking about the Cubs. That I happened to glance at one of the online boards, and they said, how are you going to feel when they sell Nate Scherholtz off later this year to a contender?
I'm going to feel the same way I felt when they signed him.
Nate who? But the diehard Cub fans, the meatball Cub fans, would be looking at this and saying, oh, my God, how could you do this? You're getting rid of somebody who's hitting 300. How can you dump him, and who are we getting for him?
Well, you know what, Jim? I'm going to go back to something you and I talked about a little bit and a couple days ago on the phone. Nate Shearholtz, what you're saying there, I can totally relate to, because the conversation I'm referring to is we talked about the 69 Cubs. Actually, let's just say the DeRocher's Cubs. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I had mentioned to you, and I also said I would have been one of the first people screaming had they done this, but DeRocher they brought in was still a good manager. Obviously the club contended almost every year that he was the manager after the first couple of years, and my impression has always been that he would have liked to have gotten rid of Ernie Banks, and as I look back on it now, as somebody who's 61 years old, as opposed to somebody who was 19 or 18 years old then, and idolized Ernie Banks, or was a big fan of Ernie Banks,
as we all did in our day.
That was probably the thing to do. And this is one of the problems that the Chicago teams, I would say, especially the baseball teams. I don't know that the Bulls and the Hawks at this point do not have it to as great a degree. We talked a little bit about the Bears and everybody sort of being upset that Urlacher was not retained. But I would say especially the baseball teams, we get so attached to our heroes who, Nate Shearholtz, it's such a great example, Jim, because Nate Shearholtz is having a very nice year. But, Nate Shearholtz is not going to mean really much as far as what are the Cubs are going to rise or fall, he's doing a nice job this year, there's no question.
There's people who are still upset that Mark DeRosa was let go.
You're right, there is. And when have we heard from Mark DeRosa since he was let go?
I don't know. I just saw a clip of him. I didn't even realize where he was playing, and he's with the Blue Jays, and there was a very funny clip on the internet last week of a post-game interview in the stadium when the young second baseman, I can't think of his name, from Japan, won the ball game with a double, I think it was, and they were interviewing DeRosa, and DeRosa called this kid out onto the field to be interviewed too.
Okay.
And he could barely speak English, but he says, he said his name, and he said, "I am from Japan. I am Japanese."
No kidding. Thanks a lot.
And then he had to take his book out to find some things that he had written down so he could say it in English. And of course, at that point in time, DeRosa snuck around and hit him with the shaving cream pie and dumped the Gatorade all over him. So at least Mark DeRosa was still maintaining a presence.
Definitely.
So we'll talk about baseball a little bit more here, but obviously last night.
Oh man, I can't believe we didn't lead. You know what, Jim? You're leading, and I'll follow. But I can't believe we didn't lead off the show with this.
Well, we started out with a baseball vein, and I thought, well, let's finish that off before we go on to hockey, because that was a game last night. That was one for the ages.
Jim, as I thought about the show today. I'm thinking the Hawks and I'll say the Red Wings, the Kings, and now the Bruins last night. The Hawks and the Red Wings, and not because the Red Wings lost these games, but in games 5, 6, and 7 of the Detroit series, great hockey on both sides. In games 4 and 5, especially of the LA series, great hockey again. And last night, I think I had mentioned to you, I want to say it would have been the late 60s, early 70s. I can remember the Hawks playing the Rangers 3 overtimes in the playoffs. And I don't even remember who won. I think it was the Hawks who won. And last night, we're getting close to the end of the third overtime, and I'm thinking, I got to go to bed. I got to get up for work. But I'm thinking, you know what? I want to see this fourth overtime because I've never gone that far in a hockey game.
I've never experienced that, and I think some of the games that you were talking about back then were the days when, obviously, back in the ancient days when home TV, when Blackhawks home games were not on TV, and I remember going to the Pickwick Theater to watch it on closed circuit, and I do remember and long overtime game. If it was 2 overtimes, 3 overtimes, I can't remember. All I know is when that goal was scored, everybody jumped up and screamed and ran out of the theater to get to their cars so they could hear the replay. They could hear Lloyd Pettit on the replay, just to hear that goal.
Man, I have to say though, Jim, that was Mark Lazarus, who wrote the game's story for the Sun-Times in today's paper, used the same word that I had used with you after the clincher in the LA series, when the Hawks were scored on with less than 10 seconds to go in the third period, and then they come back and win in overtime. I had said resilience, and he used that same word in his story today. And I have to say, last night I'm sitting there, and I guess I am the world's worst because the Hawks get down 2-0, and I'm thinking, the national media is right. The Bruins they're walking all over us. Then we score, so it's 2-1. I feel a little better. Then they go up 3-1, and it's the third period. I'm like, oh, God, you know what? We're going to lose the first game on home ice. We might get swept out of this thing. And here come the Hawks.
The mighty Blackhawks.
And it's not Kane or Hossa or Taves. It's Dave Boland and Johnny Oduya.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking this, and I don't want to go too far out on a limb because the Bruins are going to be tough. They are a tough team. But you know what? Those are the types of ways that championship teams win, when everybody contributes.
The key with the Hawks, and I heard this today as I had the radio on. If they key on the stars, the role players pick up the slack, which is exactly what happened last night.
That's true.
You had Boland get a key goal.
Yeah.
Boland was the first deflection on Shaw's winning goal.
Right.
Yeah.
And I have to say, there was a time during the season that I thought, you know what, if there's any guy that we should think about jettisoning, it's Dave Boland. He was not playing well. I know he had some injury things.
Right.
But you know what, all of a sudden, in the biggest stage, he's playing. I mean, not just because he scored a goal, but he's hitting people. He's doing a lot of little things, and just playing really solid hockey. The other thing I was going to say about the Hawks, because I know that later on you want to talk about why teams are broken and why some teams are successful. There's two things I was going to say. When the season started and they got off to such a hot start, the guys I have coffee with were saying, well, man, I can't, geez, a lot of other teams are struggling. And I said, well, think about this. They had, I'm going to say, at least a half a dozen guys under contract, young guys like Shaw, Saad, there was Bolig, and can't remember who, Letty was another one. There was at least a half a dozen that all played together till the strike was over, or the lockout, I should say, was over at Rockford. And then Kane played a little bit in, I want to say, was it Switzerland?
He played in Switzerland.
I know Frolik played in Czechoslovakia, and I don't know about the other guys. But the point was, the other thing is that I think the smart thing, because I think Bowman and the Wirtzes knew that this lockout was coming, look, Minnesota Wild picked up a couple of high-profile free agents. The Hawks picked up Sheldon Brookbank and Michael Roosevelt to sort of solidify their defense. The point would be that, okay, some of our guys were playing together as a unit. We didn't have to incorporate a lot of new players. We just incorporated a couple. So we were able to hit the ground running because we were more cohesive as a unit. The other thing that I was going to say, and it left my mind, but but I think this is one of the reasons that they got off to such a good start. Oh, the other thing, I know what made me think about that. At the trade deadline, of course, the papers want to talk about, well, we could get this guy. Jerome Iginla was on the market, a very good player. But the Hawks pick up Michael Handzus, and with Boland, playing better in the playoffs and Jesus just being very steady, they improved the center position, which was probably their weakest position, enormously.
Just an enormous improvement with that.
And Jesus is not a guy. I mean, his scoring days are over. But he's a two-way.
He never was a big scorer.
He's a two-way player.
Right.
He does a great guy on faceoffs. And I think now that I'm watching more hockey, I'm thinking of faceoffs in the same vein as you would think of rebounds or steals in basketball, because if you rebound, you've got the ball. The more possessions you have, the more chances you have to score. In hockey, it's the same thing. The more you control the puck with the face-off, the more chance.
The more you control the puck, the more you face it off.
You know what really surprised me last night? Because I tuned in at the regular third period, because I was down here doing production work. But I noticed that during the whole time from the third period until the end, there was only 2 penalties, too many men on the ice for the
Hawks.
Hawks.
Two dumb penalties.
That's right. And normally, I mean, they always have fist fights and always big brawl.
No.
But they really were.
It was a great game. It was a great game.
As I was watching this last night, I mean, I scribbled some notes down. First of all, Chara, he's a beast. He's an absolute beast. I was impressed with, at least early on as I watched, I saw the Hawks hitting more than usual.
They definitely knew they had to do that, and they did it.
And Shaw, his first couple of shifts on the ice, I thought he was just really outstanding. The Bruins are a very, very patient team.
You know what? I was impressed with more than Chara. I was impressed with Seidenberg and the Krejci.
Krejci and Lukic.
Lukic. The thing I wanted to say, if we would have been able to do this broadcast, say, before the first game, the thing I would have said, and I was happy to see last night, is the Bruins and Rask, their goaltender, had held the Penguins in 4 games to 2 goals. And I would have said, even if we would have lost, we needed to dent that confidence that they had, that they could keep a team under wraps scoring-wise. And the fact that we scored 4 goals last night, I think, is huge in the overall scheme of things.
Yeah. I'm still concerned with the Hawks' power play.
Well, it stinks.
It stinks. I mean, you had that stretch in the second period last night where first they had a 5-on-4, and then they had a 5-on-3, or 5-on-3, and then they had a 5-on-4 man advantage. The advantage. They managed one shot on goal. During that whole period, during that whole stretch. And in fact, it's so funny during the course of the game. Of course, I'm on Twitter and I'm on Facebook and I'm looking at comments, and my cousin put one up there. He said, "Can we decline the penalties?"
I was going to say I'm looking forward to the end of the penalty situation, because they play better 5-on-5 than they do 5 with an advantage.
Yeah, and John, going back to what you just said, that you're so used to seeing hockey fights and everything else and all the other stuff. Last night was just a great effort. There was physical. It was a physical game. There were big hits, and there was nothing dirty.
That's right.
Yeah.
There was nothing dirty. It was a good hockey game, the kind that you just enjoy watching.
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
It was entertaining. There was good playing. No dirty stuff among the players or anything.
Yeah.
Now, you were talking a minute ago, gentlemen, about Patrick Kane.
Yeah.
When I was with WJJG, we had a morning show on Thursdays with a sports guy, and I can't remember this guy's name, but he always wanted to go out to different places to do remote broadcasting. And the one place we went to was in Bensonville at I think it was called the Redmond Center, where they had the ice rink over there.
It's the Edge. It is the Redmond Center over there.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. The Hawks were there playing, or they were training.
They used to practice there.
Practiced there, and we did a remote there. And I'm sitting at the table, running the equipment. And who comes sitting up right next to me was Patrick Kane. And he sat down and he talked to me like he knew me for years and years and years. A year later, we went back there again to do another remote, and he came up and sat down. He said, "Hi, John, how you doing? And how's everything?" And I mean, it was very nice that he did that.
I always find hockey players to be very down to earth. The kind that you'd like to sit down and have a conversation with.
That's right, yeah.
Just that same way.
Not like that. Who was that Cubs player, Sammy Sosa, was it? That he almost drove out of the parking lot at Wrigley Field and almost hit a bunch of fans because he didn't want to talk to anybody? Was that the gentleman that I...
It might have been. I just know is that when I was a kid, I had, Dick Ellsworth slam a car door in my face when I was trying to get in.
Oh, my God, Jim.
And Larry Jackson almost... close the windows on my fingers.
Holy cripe! You really got abused by the Cubs, huh?
Well, the thing is
You're
that
still a fan.
the thing was that year Larry Jackson was living in Norwich, and I knew where he lived.
Oh, okay. No wonder you were just bugging him. You were just bugging him.
So,
oh man.
All right. What do you got on your list there, Mr. Massaro? What should we go on to next?
Well, I you know what? I'd like to talk about your subject and introduce it, Jim.
Well, it's something that kind of my mind was kind of thinking about this, and I have been reading a couple of very interesting books put out by the team at Baseball Prospectus. This one happens to be called Extra Innings, and there was an essay in there that said, how do teams like the Orioles, the Pirates, and Royals get broken, and how can they be fixed? And we can really apply that to most anything, most any team, in any sport. We can look at a case here. We just got through talking about hockey. The Blackhawks were broken for a long time.
That's true.
What did it take to fix them? Well, obviously one thing, there was a change in philosophy, and unfortunately it just the owner had to die.
Yeah, that is unfortunate.
Dollar Bill had to go.
Right.
But and it also sent Pulley away to whatever Pulley does now.
Right.
But the key here is there was a change in philosophy. You started with Dale Talon starting to make some rather judicious drafts. And then that helped. You started to bring a talent flow in. Mm-hmm. In 06, let's see, was it 06 Tays came, 07 Kane came.
Right, they came, one after the other. Yeah.
You had a different philosophy when you started to bring people in with some management skills and some management systems, especially, you hate to keep saying it, when John McDonough was hired and ran the club. That helped change the philosophy. You started to get a buzz, you started to get interest, and it turned around much quicker than we expected. Mm-hmm. Football. You can turn a football team around sometimes in a year.
I agree. I
mean, look at the Colts. Look at the Colts this year. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or last season. You went from 2-12 to 12-4. Or right. 2-14 to 12-4.
Right.
Sometimes it's just a draft pick. Sometimes it's just some changes. But what can we do in the game of baseball here when teams get broken and you start to look at things and you see teams like the Orioles, not the Orioles. Well, the Orioles finally broke their streak and had a winning season last year, but prior to that, they'd gone 14 years without a winning season. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You've got the Pirates who are going on 20 years.
Right.
What's the key here? What's the flow? How does a team, once they're successful, stay successul?
Well, the first thing, and I'm thinking about the Pirates now because what did you say, 20 years is it? This book says 1993 to 2011. They had a losing season last year. Okay. And who knows what's going to happen this year? I'm just thinking, they're in a market, and I don't want to start to get into markets, but I guess because of the market they're in, they need, I would say this, bite the bullet and keep your prospects. Don't give them up for, quick fixes. And that's the way I see the Pirates. Don't tell me that in 20 years they haven't had good prospects come through that system, and don't tell me that they haven't given some of them away stupidly, or a lot of them away stupidly. I think when you're in a situation like they are, look at the Twins. The Twins were strong for many years, and I bet you if you really analyze their team and you look at their market, it's a small market. But a lot of their players, and especially their key players, were homegrown. Mm-hmm. And I think you really have to, you mentioned the Hawks. The Hawks are a perfect example. I mean, when we go into the off season, the people who are going to be free agents are by and large people who were brought in to fill roles. Roosevelt, Hanzus, Emery, three good guys, three good veterans. But put it this way, I'm sure if they could keep them at the right price, or if they thought they could keep them, they would. But they're not going to worry too much about it because they got people on the farm that are ready to come up and take those roles. Okay?
Right. You've got a strong team in Rockford,
right,
where some of these roles can be filled. Talking about the Pirates, let's just kind of deal with them here first. You go back to look at some of their draft picks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they hit a home run with Jason Kendall early on,
okay.
But then he kind of fell off the cliff after he signed a 6-year extension with the club. The organization from that point drafted rather conservatively, and they tended towards low-ceiling players who they hoped would improve and never really did.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you look at some of the picks, a nice little chart here, you look at some of the picks since the Pirates picked Jason Kendall. You had Charles Peterson in 1993, never made the majors. Mark Ferris in 1994, never made the majors. Chad Hermanson. Okay, he was the 10th pick in the 1995 draft. If you look at one of the big stats now, as you start to look at the analytics, is wins above replacement play. Wins above replacement. Well, Chad Hermanson has a WARP of minus 2.6. So
okay.
He's nothing. The only one they've really had any success with over the years was Chris Benson.
Okay.
Other players: J.J. Davis, Clinton Johnson, Bobby Bradley, Sean Burnett.
But Jim, as you're saying this, one of the things I'm thinking of, I like to, obviously, from your conversations with me, I like to go back into the 50s and the 40s and see what was going on back then. And when you go back, especially to the time, say when Branch Rickey was running the Cardinals farm system, or you go back to the Dodgers when Rickey was involved there as well, or the Yankees. My impression is this: even today, I just read about 3-4 months ago, I guess it was the Tony La Russa's book about the last World Championship with the Cardinals, which was, talk about exciting. Watching the Hawks, I thought that World Series there between the Cards and the Rangers was just fantastic. One of the best I've ever seen, obviously, and just so exciting, even though we didn't have a rooting interest per se.
And I can't stand Tony La Russa.
But what La Russa was saying in the book, though, which is true, the Cardinals over the course of the years, and who the heck? It was something else that I was reading, and who was the guy? I can't remember. Somebody who had come to the Cardinals and talked about George Kissel. Okay, George Kissel being the face of, not the face of the organization, but had been with the organization, say, 50 years, maybe close to 60 years. And the point that this person was making, and it was a player who had come over, is that the Cardinal way, people do things the right way, and that's the way you're expected to do them. When I'm saying that, you hit the cutoff, man. You do the little things. I have to say, I have to buy into that, because I'll use a current player that I thought was just useless. I mean, he was talented, but I never could really, I didn't care for him was Carlos Beltran. But since he's been with the Cardinals, I look at him, he's almost like a brand new person. He's got to me, a totally different attitude, the way he carries himself. And part of the reason that in my mind he's such an improved player is because the Cardinals expect you, this is the way you're supposed to play the game, defensively, offensively, and this is why the Cardinals will get guys like Jack Clark, Pedro Guerrero, Orlando Cepeda, and you could, if I thought more, the list could probably go on. that were guys who were already established players that they plugged in and did really excellent things for them when they wore a Cardinals uniform, because the culture is what I'm talking about.
I can think of one that wasn't established, but when they picked him up and plugged him in,
Lou Brock. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, do you remember? And I didn't know we were going to get onto the Cardinals, and I don't remember. I'm not going to be able to think of this guy's last name, but this would have probably been in the '90s or early 2000s. The Cubs had a pitcher, Kent. Can't think of his last name. A good long reliever. He was an effective pitcher for the Cubs, and was with the Cubs for a couple of years, 2-3 years, and did well with them. And after his contract was up, the Cubs didn't retain him. And the Cardinals signed him, and that year the Cardinals needed starting pitching. And I thought he had won 20, but I checked the records. But he won like 18 or 19 games.
I can't think of his name. I know who you mean.
And these are the types of things that happen with the Cardinals. I think they have a way of teaching. They have a way of expecting that, and it's a culture that brings out the best in players. Where take a guy like a guy we talked about just a little bit earlier, Edward Jackson, who was a really hard-nosed, in my mind, hard-nosed, tough pitcher. Saw him pitch with the White Sox at the end of I don't remember which year he was here, and then he was with the Cardinals in that championship season. And to me, a very hard-nosed competitor, not a super great pitcher, but a guy you would like to have on your staff. He comes to the Cubs. He looks like all of a sudden he's a marshmallow, so why is that? It's the culture, Jim. I'd say it's the culture.
It's the culture, and I can see where you have to establish that early on. And I give Theo Epstein a credit, because they have now are developing the Cubs manual.
Mm-hmm.
So everything is consistent and it's taught the same way from the bottom up. And if you bring the people up that way, they're going to understand what the culture is. They're going to understand the philosophy, and that's what's been established for years with the Cardinals, and that's why they've been successful.
Well, the other thing is, when you talk about teams being broken, we had talked a little bit. I remember that I had always read, and I don't know if it was one of Tommy Lasorda's books that I had read, but whoever it was, or maybe Roger Kahn, when he was writing a lot about the Brooklyn Dodgers, but I don't think it was Kahn. The Dodgers were famous, at least within baseball, and people who knew. They had a strong farm system, and they would look at their players and say, well, you know what, we want to keep these, but everybody knows we have a strong farm system, so you know what, now we're going to offer this guy who, in our opinion, okay, he might be a major leaguer, but he's not going to be like an impact type of major leaguer, and we're going to get something that we want for him. And they would trade. And, people would fall for this all the time throughout the league. I mean, they'd trade and they'd get what they want. They'd give the other team what they thought they wanted, and when the other team got it, it wasn't exactly what they wanted.
Andy Pafko going to the Dodgers back in the 40s.
Sure. Andy Pafko going to the Dodgers.
For a couple of...
Well, I mean, didn't the Dodgers foist Chuck Connors on us? I'm pretty sure they did. I mean, that's a good example.
Yeah, it might have been. I don't know if that was that particular deal.
Well, that's not that particular deal, but that's the type of thing they would do.
That's the type of thing they'd wind up with.
Sure.
And it's, you go into the issue with the Cubs. We'll just talk about that. I mean, the Cubs, again, we have a whole philosophy that has to change, and it's going to be a time-consuming process.
Mm-hmm.
We talked yesterday when we chatted. Was Jim Hendry a bad general manager? No.
Nah, probably not.
Probably not. Was he told to do some things, maybe to make the value of the team look better? When Sam Zell got his hands on the Tribune and immediately said, I'm going to sell the Cubs?
Mm-hmm. Well, when you say this, Jim, what it makes me think of, now we're using a local example of Hendry, but going back to the whole premise of how do teams get broken, one of the other things I think that happens, and I think you're bringing up a really good example, one of the things that happens is a general manager, what is a general manager's contract? 2-3 years, maybe 5. He gets in a tight spot where now he's got to produce. And so what's the first thing he does? He starts to scavenge the farm system. Okay, he wants to bring in veteran players that are going to help keep his job. So in other words, he's in a tight spot, and instead of looking out for the club, he actually is looking out for himself.
He is, because he wants to keep his job.
Sure.
And move on. It was surprising that when you think of the years that Henry was here, how many managers did he hire?
Well, I don't know. Was Don Baylor and Dusty Baker, Riggleman maybe? I don't know.
I think Riggleman was here.
Was he? Okay.
Already, and Henry was working in the organization.
Okay.
I don't think he was the general manager then. That still was Andy McPhail.
Okay.
But, he had Baylor. He had to get rid of Baylor, and that was Bruce Kim during that.
Right, Bruce Kim.
Right. Dusty Baker.
Mm-hmm.
Lou Piniella.
Mm-hmm.
Not too many general managers will get, 3 or 4 shots at finding their guy.
Well, see, it brings me back, though, to, the manager obviously is important. You have manager and you have players, and you have them for a reason. But I think the only time I was ever satisfied with the people who were running the Cubs in the time that I've followed the Cubs was when Dallas Green came in. And I'm thinking what I'm about to say here is he brought in guys like Gary Matthews, Keith Moreland, Ron Say, Larry Boa, and I'm probably missing people, but those are guys who come to mind. Now, Ron Say was probably maybe a little bit on the downside of his career, or just leveling off. But the point is, you had guys who were all they all had been winning players in various organizations. They all knew how to play the game. They had their minuses. All of the guys there that I named, none of them had much speed, but they all knew pretty much how to conduct themselves on a winning team and what it took to win. And they had some successful years with Dallas Green here. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is he knew who was a ball player and who just looked like a ball player. And I think that's really important. It might sound, the way I say it might sound simplistic, but there's I'm trying to think of a guy, Jim, I think he's a basketball player, and every time anybody brings him up, I'll say, you know what, if I was a general manager on that team, this guy is a very talented player, I would never get that guy. Well, why would you not get that guy? Because he's the guy who's going to get you fired if you're the general manager, because he looks really good, but he doesn't ever really do anything to make your team better. Okay? And this is the whole deal, Jim. This is where I was before when I did a little bit of show prep. I looked at the Yankees, and I had mentioned to you there was a book that Bill Madden, who's a New York writer, wrote about the golden years of the Yankees, and he had about 10 or 15 players that gave their impressions of when they were young and with the Yankees. And Elston Howard talked about how when he was in camp with the Yankees at first, and there was 4 other catchers there. Yogi Berra was there, obviously. He was the catcher, and I think Charlie Solero is probably on the team still, a long-time backup. But he named Cal Neiman, who we know was with the Cubs, Lou Berberette, who played in the majors, Gus Triandos, and Hal Smith, who were, you had 4 guys in camp that were minor leaguers that were going to be major league catchers at some time in their careers. Now, I'm not saying any of them were stars, because none of them were, but the point I would make is you had whoever was in the Yankees organization, a couple things was happening. They knew what a major league player looked like, and they got a lot of them. The other thing is they identified which ones were going to work for them. In other words, your Elston Howards, your Yogi Berras that were going to obviously produce for you, and which ones could work for you in a different way. And one of the things that I wrote down, and I won't go into the whole thing, but in the mid-'50s, the Yankees and the Orioles made a 17-player trade.
Right.
Okay. two of the principals in that trade, going from the Yankees to the Orioles, were two of the guys I named, Gus Triandos and Hal Smith.
Don Larson was involved in that trade, too.
Don Larson came back, along with Billy Hunter, a very solid utility infielder, plus Bob Turley, who ended up to be, I believe, a Cy Young Award winner.
Bullet
Bob Turley. So, in other words, the Yankees had enough interesting people to offer to bring back what they wanted, which was really three major leaguers. Okay,
yeah.
and they got other guys besides, but they three solid major league players they got in return. And this is the way I think the winning teams and organizations operate. You get depth in your organization, and how do you do that? You get depth because you have people looking at players, and they know what they're looking at, and then you bring up the people you're going to use, and then you use the other people to get more people that you're going to use.
It's interesting that you bring that up, and especially talking about the Yankees, because one of the things is we talked about as I was looking at this and talking about how teams get broken, was talking about those Yankee teams, those great Yankee teams when Stengel was the manager in the 50s. And it really goes back to when Casey was about to start his third season as the skipper of the Boston Bees, which later, of course, became known as the Boston Braves. They were really bottoming out. And Stengel said, I've had enough. From now on, I'm going with young players. Well, he didn't get that opportunity. But when he came to the Yankees, he had that opportunity to put that practice into play. He remarked in 1955, dismissing other teams' deference to the success cycle of rebuilding. He said, that's a lot of bunk about them 5-year plans. Look at us. We build and we win at the same time.
I agree. Yeah.
You know, you had a very successful farm system, and you had a general manager back in those days, George Weiss, who almost every year was able to integrate at least one player, young player, per season into the lineup at the expense of a veteran. Okay, you go back here, 1950, the Yankees lineup. Yogi Berra was the catcher, 25 years old. Joe Collins was at first, 27. Jerry Coleman was the second baseman, 25. Billy Johnson was the third baseman, 31. Phil Rizzuto was at short, 32. Hank Bauer was one of the outfielders, 27 years old. Joe DiMaggio was 35. Gene Woodling was 27.
Well, go ahead.
Okay. 1951, Billy Johnson got replaced by Gil McDougall.
Okay.
24 years old. 1952, Billy Martin, 24 years old. Mickey Mantle, 20 years old. Replaced Jerry Coleman, 27 years old. Joe DiMaggio, 36 years old. 1954, Andy Carey became the third baseman. Replaced somebody who was in the military. 1955, Moose Skowron, 24 years old. Billy Hunter, 27 years old. Elston Howard, 26 years old. Were all integrated into the lineup, replacing Joe Collins, Phil Rizzuto, and Gene Woodling. 1957, you had Bobby Richardson, 21 years old, replaced Billy Martin, who was only 29.
Right.
You know, and then you had Tony Kubek come in. Then the following year, you had Norm Seaburn replaced Enos Country Slaughter, who was 42 years old at the time. After that, 1960, you had Clete Boyer coming in, and then you had Roger Maris come in.
Well, you know what? Now, when you said Enos Slaughter, it triggered another thought about how this process works, because when you as you were mentioning the first group of players, Joe Collins and I think Billy Johnson and Rizzuto and Coleman, I'm thinking, Billy Johnson, Collins, Coleman, and Rizzuto were all replaced pretty shortly after that, and McDougall I knew was going to be one of the guys. But what I'm also thinking about with an organization that is a winning organization, we said it earlier about the Blackhawks. They made one small move at the trade deadline. They brought in a veteran centerman, not with any gaudy stats. In fact, I think he was inactive for about 10 or 12 games before the Sharks even let him go. Wasn't a flashy move, but they brought in something they needed. And I would say over the course of time, the Yankees were probably the masters at this. But I had written down a couple of names here. One was Bump Hadley, and the other was Murray Dixon.
Mm-hmm.
Bump Hadley, over the course of his career, had some really, I think, a 20-win season at least once with the Senators. He had also had years where he was like 10-16, 12-16, things like that. But you're playing with a losing club, and as you're playing with that club, of course, back then the Yankees would see you pretty often, and they knew, hey, this guy may have a losing record, but he's a good pitcher. They acquired Bump Hadley probably when he was somewhere in his 30s. He pitched for 4 or 5 years for them, won 50 games, lost like 29 games. Okay, very effective pitcher for them. Murray Dixon was a similar guy. Now, he only played one season, or part of one season, with the Yankees, but what I'm saying is he didn't make as big a splash as Hadley, but they needed a veteran that they knew could pitch. And when they got him at 40-some years old, he had been 9-5 the first part of that season with the Kansas City A's, who were a poor ball club. They brought him in at the end of the 58 season. I think he had a couple of decisions. He might have been 1-2 or whatever. But what I'm saying is you bring in a veteran that you know knows how to handle himself, especially in tight situations, which the Yankees were going to be in because they're going to be in a pennant race or a World Series. And you enhance your club that way. So you know who can play and who can't play, who's going to help you, who's not going to make mistakes, who are the guys you want to stay away from, who are the guys you want to get. And this is what helps make you into a winning organization. And this is also what helps break organizations. I'd just say, like the Cubs. I wrote down names. Willie Wilson, I told you the other day.
Right.
We got Willie Wilson when he was 38 years old.
Right.
He had been he's a lifetime 285 hitter. He bats 258 and 238 for the Cubs his last parts of 2 seasons. 600 and some stolen bases in his career. He gets 8 for the Cubs. Why? And the Cubs had a team that year that I think won 64 games. Why would you? What would even possess you to think that Willie Wilson could help you? You're not even in a position that where if you were a contender and you wanted to use Willie Wilson and maybe use him, spot him in, use him where he can help you the most, that makes sense.
Right.
But to bring him in as your starting center fielder for a team that has no chance of contending makes no sense at all. And that's so. In other words, when his year or 2 with you is done, now you got to start the search for a center fielder all over again because you have nothing, and you have nothing to trade. He's not tradable, and this is what gets you broken.
This is what gets you broken. Poor deals. Is the draft a help? Because, especially with baseball, you're generally not going to see any results from it for 4 years.
To be honest, I'd say the major league draft, the baseball draft, it's a crapshoot. I just saw the paper that you have in front of you there did a little article about Tim Anderson, who was the Sox number one choice. 19 years old, he's played junior college baseball, really well there. He's from a small town in Mississippi. Not that makes any difference. Mickey Mantle is from a small town in Oklahoma. But I guess my point would be, does he look good? Sure, I'm sure he's got all the skills. But what kind of people has he played against? What's the competition level he's at? And I think that would give you the biggest indication of how well he'll do. I would say that if you're from Meridian, Mississippi, and you've played junior college baseball, you better have dominated at that,
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
Again, I would say you might look really good, but it's just like, and I know that we're almost done.
We got about a minute.
We got a minute.
Minute and change.
Like when the Bulls drafted Eddie Curry, I said, so what? Eddie Curry could not even win the state championship against I hate to say it this way, against a bunch of white boys when he was a senior in high school.
At Thornton.
How is he supposed to be?
How is he supposed to go up against
whip
the
up on the pros?
I don't know.
So
have you got a good name or a good fact that we can finish off here?
Oh man, how about guys? Anybody here a boxing fan?
Sure.
Over the years?
Sure.
Do you remember? I'll give you a name. How about Duke Sabadong?
Oh, boy.
Duke Sabadon,
All right.
a heavyweight boxer from Hawaii back in the 50s and 60s. I think he's one of those guys who could have been a contender. I think he was a contender. He might have been in the top 10 for a short spell, but Duke Sabadon.
He was a tomato can. I had something else in mind, but as we were looking here and I had the paper open, you realize on this day in 1973, the Los Angeles Dodgers infield of Steve Garvey at first, Davey Lopes at second, Ron Say at third, and Bill Russell at shortstop played together for the first time.
Great infield. That's why the Dodgers, as you said, in the late 70s, were always a contending team.
In a 16-3 loss against the Phillies.
Well,
And they went on to play 8.5 years in the same infield.
Excellent.
We got to get out of here.
Okay.
I think we had some fun today.
I'll tell you, that went by too fast, Jim.
I know. John, you going to let us come back and play here sometime? John nods yes. Okay, I guess we can come back and play. We'll figure out a date. We hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for listening. Thanks for
From the John DeVita Broadcast Center, you have been listening to Armchair Experts with Jim Leon and Rich Massaro on the Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network. Thanks for listening.